Welcome to Environment and Safety Management Institute training on environmental safety and management. Today, I want us to look at personal protective equipment, PPE. Now, when we talk about a personal protective equipment, a personal protective equipment refers to that equipment that you wear on your body to prevent the part of your body from being exposed to harm. Each part of the body has a personal protective equipment. There's a personal protective equipment for the head. For instance, something like this is called a helmet, which is used to protect the head against anything that will harm the head. You have personal protective equipment for the hands, something like gloves, whereby you use them to protect your hands against any danger. There are personal protective equipment for the eyes, like the eye goggles. There are personal protective equipment for the nose. There are personal protective equipment for each part of the body that you have to deal with. So a personal protective equipment is worn to prevent your body from harm. Someone will ask, so what is the role of personal protective equipment in hazard control? Personal protective equipment which are worn to minimize the exposure of your body to hazards are very essential in the workplace. They present the last line of defense in the hierarchy of control. If you were part of our previous lecture where we were talking about hazard control, personal protective equipment was the fifth line, which is the last line of defense. Organizations should first attempt the first, which is elimination of the hazards, implementing of engineering and administrative controls before they talk about using personal protective equipment to supplement these other measures that they provide. So these personal protective equipment, they are there as a protection when higher level controls are not feasible. There is a limitation to the extent to which you can use personal protective equipment because they protect only the wearer. Okay, they don't provide any other protection if they are not properly worn on the body. For instance, this is a reflective jacket. Now, if you wear this reflective jacket, it's to help somebody who is coming. It reflects and identifies you more prominently as a worker on the side. So it helps only the wearer and it protects only the wearer from the harm. But if it is not properly worn on the body, even the wearer, it will not be able to protect him or her properly. So this personal protective equipment, from the selection, okay, of this personal protective equipment, you will discover that each and every personal protective equipment is meant for a particular hazard, to prevent you from a particular hazard. Let me give you an example. Now, if you are talking of a personal protective equipment like the hand gloves, okay, the hand glove that is being used by the goalkeeper who is playing in a football field is different from the hand glove that is being used by a nurse or a doctor in the hospital. And it's also different from the hand glove that is being worn by somebody who is managing waste, because it is meant to protect you from a particular hazard. And this hazard has to be carefully selected so that the personal protective equipment involved will match the hazard. Now, there are responsibilities that the employer needs to do to ensure that personal protective equipment are effectively used. Organizations must establish a comprehensive personal protective equipment program. This will include, one, the hazard assessment, whereby they conduct surveys, they identify the hazards that require personal protective equipment and document their findings. Then they will do a selection whereby they choose the appropriate personal protective equipment based on the hazards that are present, ensuring that the equipment meets applicable standards and fits properly into the use that they are being meant for. Then the next thing that they will do, they will provide the personal protective equipment. You supply the required personal protective equipment at no cost to the employee. It is not the responsibility of the employee to have a personal protective equipment. It's the responsibility of the employer to make sure that there are personal protective equipment for the employees, except in limited circumstances, maybe such as no specialty safety toe footwears. In those instances, it is not necessarily that your employer should provide for you such what a personal protective equipment. Let me give you an example. The banker that is going to the bank to work needs a foot protection on his feet, but that is not a specialty shoe. Therefore, you will not expect that the bank should buy the shoe for him. Therefore, he will have to acquire it by himself. Another thing that the employer needs to do about personal protective equipment is training. They have to ensure that the employees know when a personal protective equipment is needed, what personal protective equipment is required to be used, and how to properly use that personal protective equipment, how to wear it, and also how to what? To remove it. They also need to know the limitations that these personal protective equipment have to what? To themselves. Another issue is the issue of enforcement. It is the duty of the employer to enforce that those people working under his or her company are what? Are wearing or using the required personal protective equipment consistently. They have to enforce it, or else when there are consequences of the release of hazards against these people, the employer will also bear the brunt of it. And the other thing is the issue of maintenance. You have to establish programs for cleaning, inspection, repair, and replacement of the personal protective equipment. Finally is the issue of what? Evaluation. Periodically, you need to reassess the PPE that is being used in your organization. What is the adequacy? Are there updating programs that are needed to make sure that this PPE is effective in the organization? These things are what? Are very, very important for every organization to take into consideration. Types of personal protective equipment and applications. Types of personal protective equipment and what? Application. As I said, there are different personal protective equipment for different parts of the body. For instance, head protection. When I was talking about head protection, I talk about things like helmets, okay? Safety helmets, hard hats, they protect the head against falling objects, against bombs, electrical hazards, okay? Now, if you have something as hard as this, this thing is very, very hard. So anything that is falling on the head, once you wear this on the head, anything falling will hit on this and we know what? Affect your own head. That is the extent to which what? A personal protective equipment protects the body. Now, you have different types of helmet. You have the hat, headgears. You have the hat, you have the helmet, and even these helmets are classified. Okay, you have what is called the type 1 hard hat that protects you against top impact that comes from the head, and then you also have a type 2 hard hat that protects you from what? From side impact that comes against the head. You also have what we call the class E hard hat, that is the electrical works that you are doing in what? In your organization. You also have the class G, which is the general hard hat, which is also meant to protect you from both electrical, from heat, and other exposures that you find yourself in the work environment. Hats are worn with the beads facing forward. Therefore, you cannot wear this hat and turn this bead to face what? Backward like this or sideward like this. It has to be worn and the bead will face what? The front. This is to ensure that it also gives some protection to the what? The foreface. And then you have what is called the eye and face protection, where you have things like eye goggles, safety glasses, face shields that protect you against flying particles, chemicals flashing. For instance, if somebody is doing something like fumigation, protect your eye against splashes of what? Chemicals and all that. Then you also have safety glasses that have side sheets against impact hazards. You have goggles that provide greater protection against chemical splashes or fine particles. You have hearing protection like earplugs, disposable foam earplugs. They provide all this economical protection when they are properly inserted into the ear, and they are disposed immediately after the operation. There are also reusable earplugs that offer consistent protection and easier donning when you are carrying out your operation, especially at places that are highly noisy, like airports or where big machines are and they are producing a lot of noise. You have hand protection like the hand gloves that protect you against abrasions, against punctures, against chemical exposures, thermal heat, biological agents like viruses, and all that. But the selection of these hand gloves depend on the nature of oppression that you have found yourself in. These hand gloves, they are used differently depending on the oppression that is there. Then you have foot protection. In foot protection, you have different safety footwears that protect you against injuries, punctures, slip and falls, electrical hazards, and all that. Now, if you take a safety boot, you will discover that the boot contains what we call a protective cap at the tip of the safety boot. There are also respiratory protection. Now, if you use something like this, to wear on your nose, it protects you from what? From inhaling dust, inhaling chemical particles, and all that. There are other nose masks that, for instance, you go to the hospital, you look at it that the one that's being used by the doctors is different from these ones that you see the engineers wearing it when they are in the field. So then you also have what is called protective clothing. Protective clothing, things like this reflective jacket is used for protective clothing. Things like the overalls, okay? Overalls are also meant for what? They are protective clothing. They resort to high visibility to ensure that the workers are seen, especially where there is traffic. They have chemical restraints suits that protect you against splashes. For instance, if you are dealing with chemicals or you are working in a workshop, using this, whether it is stain or everything, we protect your normal clothing stain. So these protective clothing are also personal protective equipment. You also have fall protection, okay? Fall protection, like the personal fall arrest systems that protect workers at elevated locations, full body harness, lanyards, shock absorbers, anchor points. All these fall protecting equipment require specialized training, regular inspection, and immediate removal from the service after arresting a fall. So these things are personal protective equipment that you use in your daily operations as the last line of control of hazards. Now let's talk about selection of PPE. PPE selection process. Now, a proper selection process for your personal protective equipment requires that first you should identify the hazard through hazard assessment. You should understand the limitations of the different personal protective equipment types that are available. You should consult your manufacturer's specification and standards data sheets. You should consider ergonomics, because if you are wearing a personal protective equipment that will make you uncomfortable, for instance, just imagine that the doctor is to wear this type of hand gloves into the theater. How will he be able to hold the necessary equipment that he needs to use and carry out an operation. So you consider ergonomics, how suitable the personal protection equipment is against what? The job that is being done. Now, as I said earlier, personal protective equipment require training. Okay, there are training requirements because effective PPE training will help you address the necessity of having that personal protective equipment, what the personal protective equipment should be used for the specific tasks, how to properly wear it, adjust it, remove it, and all that, the limitations of the personal protective equipment, the proper care, the maintenance and usefulness of the personal protective equipment, how you can dispose it after use, the signs that the personal protective equipment is beginning to wear and it needs replacement. All these things are captured during what? Training for the use of personal protective equipment. Now, let's talk about inspection and maintenance of personal protective equipment. PPE must be inspected before each use. Before each use, a PPE must be what? Inspected. And then it has to be maintained according to the manufacturer's instruction. Okay? What are you inspecting in the PPE? You are inspecting cracks, you are inspecting tears, you are inspecting holes or deformation. Okay, whether it has fasteners or it has worn traps, whether it has tracks, okay, whether it has contamination or degradation, okay, whether all the component parts of the personal protective equipment are functioning properly. These are the things that needs to be what? Inspected and maintained to ensure that the personal protective equipment is at its maximum usage. Then I would like us to talk about storage and accessibility. PPE must be readily accessible to workers when it is needed. The storage should protect the equipment from damage, from contamination, from moisture, from exposure to ultraviolet rays, okay, or extreme temperatures. So a designated storage location should be clearly identified and adequate inventory maintained to replace a damaged PPE whenever the equipment is what? Is damaged. There are some special considerations that we need to look at when we are discussing personal protective equipment. Okay? First thing is the issue of multiple PPE use. When multiple types of PPE are worn together, you make sure that you ensure compatibility. Now, how will they be compatible? You are referring to a situation whereby PPE A that is worn on the head, maybe the helmet, is compatible with the eye goggle that you are using, and it's also compatible with what bra that you are using, or the apron, as the case may be. Now, this has to consider issues of fashion, issues of design, has also to be taken into consideration. If you want to use a respirator, for example, the respirator also has to be considered in line with the other personal protective equipment that you are using at that particular point. Apart from multiple use, another thing that needs to be considered is environmental factors. Consider how environmental conditions will affect the PPE performance and user comfort. For instance, heat stress. Okay, you need to consider the issue of heat from impermeable clothing, forging of your eyewear in humid conditions, because if these things are not taken into consideration, it will affect the use and the comfort of the person that is using the personal protective equipment. Another issue is the issue of communication. Your PPE should be such that it is possible to communicate with the person that is using the PPE while the work is in progress. If it's a PPE that will impair communication, then you have to establish an alternative communication method when necessary, because communication during the operations is very, very important. Thank you so much for your time, for participating in today's class. If you want to get trained, get certified on environmental safety, you can always come to the Environment and Safety Management Institute. You will visit our website at www.esmi.org.ng, or you send us a message through email or on WhatsApp at +2348179716797. Thank you so much for being part of today's class. We expect you in our next class. Please, if you have any questions, drop it in the comment section and we will reply you accordingly. Thank you.